I hold a very particular position in society, and that is I am a never married mother. When we put it in these modern contexts and we kind of misappropriate the meaning of it, then it becomes an ego play between man and woman alone, and not how are we moving together to create the strongest structure or system.
Right? People don't tend to say, hey, I kind of get what you're saying, but I'd love to hear more. Let's actually talk about it.
Yeah.
It's just, I disagree with you. I hate you. I'm going to write some angry words on the keyboard. I'm going to leave and just, pass that hate on.
Yeah. In the long game, that's what it means. It means every man and woman loses in this situation. And I bring that forward, and I know, some people are like, whoa, that's a lot.
So officially, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to have you here. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
I am excited particularly because in the past, I think yesterday, or maybe today, I was scrolling through, stalking your Instagram real quick, and I noticed you've maybe touched on some hot topic, if you will, which I think I would love for this conversation to kind of touch on.
Sure.
With regard to what it means. There's a couple things, but what it means to have women at the center of a relationship, or just as the center of life, if you will. So let's start, if you could, by explaining what it was you were talking about, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Well, that is, a big topic. And I think there's kind of two ways to talk about it. And one is from a very scholarly research perspective of what is our history and why does it matter? And then the other is just through hard-earned life experience. And I feel that it's where those kind of come to meet, that confluence, that places me in a very particular position to talk about it. Right?
Okay. Why you? Let's start there.
Sure thing. Two reasons. One is I hold a very particular position in society, and that is I am a never married mother, which didn't mean anything to me until I was one. And then I really realized that our entire culture brings women up to have an identity built on relationship and not an identity built on self. And what I mean by that is men are not conditioned in the same way to see, let's say, marriage as a defining quality of who they are, but rather as sort of a milestone in life. Whereas being a wife and a mother can actually become your whole identity as a woman. And so when we place women at the center, we actually give women the right to exist of their own accord. We place their dreams and visions back into the conversations on leadership. We start to get curious about how they're seeing the world, and the way that they make decisions, which is radically different biologically from the way that men make decisions. And so I think becoming a never married mother was one shock to my system. I didn't realize that our systems are not in place for never married mothers. They're not in place for mothers who become mothers without a support structure already in place. Right? And I think that's another part of this conversation is we're in a moment in history where we don't have social structures that support mothers. And what that means is negative impact for the neurobiology of our children. In the long game, that's what it means. It means every man and woman loses in this situation. So if you have any, next question when you hear that information, I'd love to dig deeper.
Yeah. Well, let me, I guess, rewind a step and say this entire conversation is such a nuanced tightrope walk because there are so many caveats and one-off examples that you could dive into a yeah, but scenario.
Yeah.
And I want to preface all of it by saying, if anything I say seems argumentative, that's not the intention, right? The point of this is to have a conversation as a man and a woman about a thing that a lot of people are going to argue about, where hopefully at the end of it, someone can say, hey, I now understand some context and can think a little bit deeper for myself. Because this is it's a touchy subject, right? And I think that there's a lot of ego involved, not necessarily from your side. What I'm saying is, but
Sure.
if you say, like, I think just to start at the first thing we talked about women at the center, I think a lot of men will hear that and say, no, frankly, because I think there's a lot of ego involved and they have to be also involved. And it can't necessarily be, hey, you can be at the center of whatever it is that you want to be at the center of, without taking away from me being at the center of my own situation. Right? And I think that there's almost this, in order for you to rise, I need to fall mentality that a lot of people approach. And that, I think, is the first thing that we need to address. Is like, hey, you being at the center of your own life does not negatively affect me at all. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just this conversation, I have it with women in my programs all the time because women have been indoctrinated the same way. So when we see another woman rise, we are trained to interpret that as we're falling, right? And that's a way that we've been conditioned to make meaning, And so I love to like continue to touch on that, and say even this idea, right? Even the idea that this is a touchy subject is a worldview, right? Everything we're doing is a meaning-making project. And so, it's like the way we enter things matters. And, when you were talking about the possibility, right? I love to say the possibility of egos being offended, because when we assume that they're going to be offended, chances are we're going to find that reality, right? So I'm more and more careful with the way I frame it, because I also really value men and not conditioning men, right? In this process to kind of stay in a groove. Yeah. And when you said that, I have to just say, I saw an image in my mind, right? Of, again, women at the center doesn't mean women are the focus. It means let's look at our ancestral history and how did we stand as a tribe? How do we stand as a culture? Like, look at our bodies. Men are larger bodied. They have different aperture, right, to move through the world, and they stood on the perimeter. They stood on the perimeter and protected women and children in the center because of a biological reality of vulnerability. Like, that's not hard to understand, But when we put it in these modern contexts and we kind of misappropriate the meaning of it, then it becomes an ego play between man and woman alone, and not how are we moving together to create the strongest structure or system.
Right. Which I think, so there's two things I want to touch on there. There's the nuance of, and how do I explain this? We, as men and women, we need to have this symbiotic relationship where we work together to move each other forward. Yes. But at the same time, we also need to be self-sufficient where we don't necessarily need the other person to complete ourselves, right? That's, again, this whole thing is like,
right, like human development.
The asterisk for nuance. But, I think that's an important thing to understand too. But to go back a step to what you talked about where women are kind of preconditioned to this relationship aspect, to the institution of motherhood and all of that. And men don't necessarily have that, right?
Right.
Men are not preconditioned to be husbands, typically.
Correct.
It's, hey, and this is again where it gets super tricky. Typically, the direction is you're going to go out there and be the protector and the provider, right? That's typically for men, at least from my perspective, what you're conditioned to believe that you have to grow up to be, right? That's where your value in society is worth. And I think that that's where it comes down to ego a little bit. When you look at, hey, if the woman is at the center, and I'm speaking from a man's perspective, not necessarily my perspective, but just that of a man. If a woman is at the center, I think for the fragile ego in this scenario, who's not necessarily sure of who they are and their own worth, right, and how that they were created, they're only looking at, oh, I'm just pushed to the side. My only utility in life is to be a protector and a provider. And then that's it. I'm worthless after that, right? Because the center, the good stuff is not me, right? And I think that's where that hurt comes in. Right? And that's, again, from my perspective, I think that's where a lot of people get lost in the conversation.
I love putting on someone else's mind, I love that. And I think where it takes me is like, again, back a step in where this starts. Because what you said is so true. If I don't have a strong sense of self that is sort of unshakable, if I haven't been brought up in a way that I feel self-secure, then I'm going to have a stronger self-protective ego. I'm going to have a stronger self-protective brain and neurobiology. And so I think it serves us to go, how did that happen? How did it happen that men are not feeling secure? How did it happen that women are not feeling secure in who they are? You know, so much so that it's hard to see others win. Like, that to me is kind of the question. And what I found to be really interesting in my scholarly journey, I'm 3 years into a PhD right now. I did a MA in transformative leadership. So I've been looking at how do we really change versus ideas of how change happens in culture and, you know, between sexes and all of this. And one of the most interesting things that I found was that when there is a lack of reverence in a culture for the Divine Mother, it means when we don't see it. You know, Marion Woodman talks about, can you believe we have children that make it through 12th grade and have never heard the term the Great Mother? Like, in a way that cultures did for centuries, you know, and they don't see images. We don't go, you know, I don't know if you know the Sheila Nagi. There's an image that used to be on the top of churches in Ireland and Scotland, way, way back, right? Prehistory almost. And they were a woman just like holding her labia open. This was on top of these, you know, places of worship. I mean, talk about a different entry point, right? Like a different conditioning altogether. And I bring that forward and I know, you know, some people are like, whoa, that's a lot. But just to give you an idea of the difference, right? And so when we don't see images of the mother as a creator, as a portal, as something that facilitates growth for everyone, what happens is we don't actually take care of our women in culture because we don't have a value for that creatrix in culture. Mm. And what they found, and this is kind of the big like tipping point, is that in cultures where that's not part of the ethos, where mothers are not being revered, where kids are not seeing their mothers loved, cared for, praised, you know, upheld, when they're seeing them just cleaning and cooking and managing and driving, you know, they take all of that in. And especially in situations where they're seeing mothers talked down to, abused, et cetera, they're seeing that as there's something wrong with the place I came from, like very deep in our brain, right? This is the person who gave birth to me. And if there's something that fundamentally wrong with them, if there's something that's not secure about them, then I take that in as a young child and I see that and I go, well, then there must be something wrong with me.
Right.
And I don't become sure. Yeah.
Let's pause there for a second because I have two separate thoughts on what you just said. Number one is I think in that scenario, what it makes me think of, if we're talking about the mother being honored in a relationship, in the household, right?
Yeah.
There's two sides to that, right? Obviously, she needs to understand her worth and what she will accept, right? But I think the other side of that is up to the father, husband in that scenario to also do the honoring, right? So there needs to be that culture of men who step up to the standard, who exemplify what it looks like to honor that relationship.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where I think it gets a little tricky because, you know, we have to push both sides of this equation forward at the same point. Otherwise it all gets super messy. And I think to that same point, you know, if we look at, I know this is a broad word, but if we look at the term feminism and kind of how it shows up in current society, where at least there's a portion of it that is this, I am woman, hear me roar, I don't need no man. And obviously that's not everybody, so don't hear me wrong.
Sure.
But it's, you know, we're not necessarily valuing, hey, you created life or you're capable of creating life. Cool, your work is done. You did a really freaking awesome thing. You could retire on top. You don't necessarily need to go pursue a CEO level position to prove your worth. And I think that there is a percentage of women who are going to look to do that because whether it's, hey, that's the way that they feel worthy. And again, if that's your thing and you want to do that, totally cool, props to you.
Yeah.
But I think it's this sort of cultural position we found ourselves in where we're putting more value on your contribution to society in that way than in like the family.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I know it's a super weird thing to explain and I probably did a poor job.
It's not a weird thing to explain. And I understand it. And I think there's a huge gap, though, in understanding that most women are not seeking, there's always some, but most women are not seeking to prove themselves. They're seeking to protect themselves in a culture that is not set up to catch them if something goes wrong in relationship. So because we don't live in a matriarchy, because kids aren't given to mothers through court systems, right? If something happens in a relationship and she doesn't hold wealth, then her whole life can explode overnight, right? And I think it's hard for people to understand unless they've been there, right? Unless they see it. And 90% of the women I work with are absolutely not looking to prove something with their finances. They're just looking to get by. They're looking to make $5,000 to $10,000 a month. And that's a big deal, right? Because it hasn't been normalized. Like their path to making that amount of money hasn't even been normalized. They've made the children. And I see what you're saying. Like when we don't value the fact that creating is worth something, but more than that, you would have to place a market value on that in a market economy because we don't live in a gift economy. We live in a market economy. So we would have to play by the rules of the market economy or by a patriarchy in order, right, to provide protection for women. So it would have to be a both and, like, or a yes and. Yes, we value reproduction. We value woman as creator, and we set up systems to protect her financially, regardless of what happens in relationship. And that's the way that we revere her because we're in a market economy.
And I guess there's a part of that too, where that version of reality, which is probably, I don't know, I don't want to put a number to it, but we'll call it 80 to 90% of most people's experiences, is not sexy enough to hit social media and prime time because it's just not fun, right? They don't want to give that the clicks and the views. So what do you see? You see the extremes. And so the majority of people feel some level of like emotionally homeless that they don't know where to turn because they feel like they are the broken ones.
Yeah.
So then how do we have these conversations? And again, that was the reason why I'm so excited to have this conversation because it's not the type of conversation you can typically have in the comment section, right? Most people are going to jump 100%. To feeling offended and they just want to, make you mad or upset because somehow that justifies them, right? People don't tend to say, hey, I kind of get what you're saying, but I'd love to hear more. Let's actually talk about it. It's just, I disagree with you. I hate you. I'm going to write some angry words on the keyboard. I'm going to leave and just, pass that hate on. So where do we start like having these conversations more normally?
Oh, I mean, I feel like that's my whole challenge, right? In coming into social media more in just the next couple years of my life, how I'm positioning to have more of these conversations, and I think it's beautiful how the last 2 podcasts I've been on have been organic. Like I haven't tried to set these up. It was someone else saying, hey, I think you should talk to so-and-so. And they've both been with strong men in leadership roles. And I thought, how interesting is this? Right. So I'm not necessarily going on Empowerment Women's podcasts. Like I'm in conversation in demographics and in spaces where there's a lot to learn, So, So I think that's part of it is just showing up to the table. And I feel like do you have a second question in terms of like what you're looking for? Are you looking for certain supports in how to have these conversations or?
No, I think for me, what I'm looking for is just to have the conversations. To me, like if two people can sit down, particularly a man and a woman, can sit down and have a conversation where it's not, hey, it makes me think about like when you think of who's the head of the house.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's a competition for who's number one, right? Who stands on top of the podium. But it shouldn't be that, right? It shouldn't be, hey, who's the head of the house? And I am the dictator of the household. Yeah, there's certain things where one will overrule the other. Like it just is what it is. But it's that give and take. And I think that there's mutual respect that comes with that, but it has to be mutual respect. And a lot of times what has to happen is one person's going to have to go first and give more respect than they're receiving, because we also have to understand we are all broken in some way, shape, or form and need a level of healing to understand who the heck we are. Right. So, I feel like when you look at relationships, a lot of times we tend to let our own internal hurts be how we interpret other people's actions. Right. And what winds up happening is, and I lived a large part of my life this way, my own shortcomings, my own, past pains were the lens that I looked at our relationship in. Right. And I would judge my wife's actions based on my history.
Yeah.
And, it reminds me of that quote, like if you spend your entire life judging a fish by its ability to climb a tree, you'll think the fish is whatever. Right. But like it's the same concept applies here. Like if you put that perspective on things, you're going to just wind up in an awful situation. Yeah. So I think it's right. The picture of possibility to sit and have these conversations where it's like, hey, yeah, you can have this conversation. Maybe you don't agree on everything. Right. And I kind of think that's the point. Yeah. Because if you both agree on everything, one of you is useless. Right. There has to be a little bit of disagreement. But with the same intention that like, hey, you and I may not agree on everything. Yeah. But the goal is to move everybody forward. Yeah. Right. We have a common goal. We may view things differently, and that's the point we're supposed to. And that's why I feel like having these types of conversations, sitting down to be like, all right, cool. This is the way you see it. This is the way I see it. How do we come together? Yeah. Gives people the opportunity to kind of do the same thing.
Absolutely. And, when I hear you again, it's like I don't want to get caught in semantics, but I study neurophysiology. I study the way that past memories, emotional learnings affect our breathing, affect our reactions, right? And so I want to maybe bring this little piece in, which is we're often sidelining one of what I see as the most important pieces of all of this, and that is breathing. So what do we share without any room for, how do you say, conflict? We both are in breathing bodies. That is 100% a fact. When we're not in a breathing body, we are no longer.
So what does that mean in less technical terms? Because I think there's like, obviously, yes, we're both alive, but I'm not sure that's what you mean.
No, it's not, right? Because we're alive, but what we've been missing is
it's more
our
the
breathing.
calm state where we're logical.
Right. So this one, like, it's a thing. You kind of got to stay with it for those listening, right? We've missed the fact that what makes us alive is that we're breathing. And our breath patterns always correlate to what is happening in our central nervous system and our brain. So what happens in a moment of, because this is piggybacking on your story about being in that reactive space with someone you love. So what's happening in those moments is my brain is recalling a past emotional memory, something that felt overwhelming in the past. That's triggering my physiology. My breath immediately changes. That tells my brain to act as self-protection or act as engagement or act with my supreme imagination, right? It's giving directives. My breath is giving directives in terms of where to place my mental cognitive energy. Is this a moment to be in protection? Is this a moment to be in engagement and curiosity? Or is this a moment where we're both safe to imagine a whole new level together? Okay? And how I'm breathing in any moment with another human being is going to be indicative of how I'm operating. Whether I'm really in my imagination, which is, I believe, our future. This is like where it all comes down to it for me is our breath and our imagination create capacity for entirely new futures. Because what we've been doing up till now in human history, for the most part, let's generalize, I love to do that sometimes, is we've been living from past memories, and we've basically been capped in our development because we haven't had the tools or the consciousness as a collective. We haven't had collective safety large enough. But now look at us. Like, we're in our own homes, creating wealth from our living rooms. Even though some are not safe in certain situations, we are safer than maybe ever in human history with this many people on the planet, right? And that means there's a lot of people able to access their creative energy from a place of safety. So I like to just remind us, like, we're in breathing bodies. How I'm breathing is connected to my emotional past. So I can really gain like capacity with the other, between man and woman, between woman and woman, when I'm tending to my breath and when I'm tending to my past emotional memories. And so I feel that's where my work has kind of like come down to this crux of how can I really help people, right? And how do I make sure I'm not talking around things when we could be doing real change in the body and the brain?
So as I understand it, and I just want to give you back what I heard.
Yeah, sure.
It's the way that your body is breathing is essentially the first point in the trigger system. Everything else after that. If you have calm breath, you'll have calm thoughts, and you will view the current reality in a situation that is likely favorable to an outcome that is favorable to you. Basic understanding?
Basic with a caveat. Side caveat is I am training myself to breathe calmly and fully. Yes. In fact, I'm just going to give this side fact. There's a breath called upnea. Okay, it's the opposite of apnea. Have you ever heard of like sleep apnea? Okay, opposite of that is upnea. And it means a balanced and full breath. Okay, that is neurologically, neurophysiologically supportive of the system. So yes, when I have that upnea, that full and balanced breath, I'm able to come into my frontal lobe. I'm able to be in engagement without defensiveness. I'm able to imagine, but we haven't talked about focus yet. Many of us have to learn to focus. But it's like above and beyond that upnea, that balanced breath, then there comes this point where I have to also admit I'm not in control of everything, even if my breath is beautiful. And there may come something into my consciousness, a thought from the past. There may be a sound, an ambulance goes by. Who knows what the trigger is, but there could be an environmental stimulus that pulls me into a memory, right, in my limbic brain. And it just takes me right out of that beautiful balanced breath and back into something different, right? So it's like, yes, we're training the breath over time to be full and balanced and to kind of do the regulation for us. And then there's this memory piece, right? Where because of our memories, thoughts trigger us, sounds trigger us, environments trigger us. And I mean that in a good way. I think trigger is the best thing that can happen to me, at least. Because then what happens is it activates a neural network in the brain. The moment that I'm emotionally activated, a neural network lights up in the brain. And it's only when it's active, only when I'm triggered, then it actually becomes plastic, that I can actually change that network. And I think this is missed like a lot of the time. The idea that we can do brain change and thought change without feeling the pain is a fallacy in terms of melting neural networks. You can create great new ones, really great new ones. You can prune old ones, but to melt that network that gets triggered in the first place, like that requires feeling it and disconfirming it, which maybe we'll get to later. But I just want to kind of say, like, it's not quite as simple as once I'm balanced and breathing, like I'm good. There's also this aspect of let's think of it like a coin. One side is breathing, one side is memory. And so if I can get the hang of these two things, I can shift a lot in my experience.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that there's a large part of that too, that comes at the start with the self-awareness to understand which side of the coin you're on.
Yeah. And really just realizing like that they, when you pick up a coin, it's one thing, right? That they're one thing. Yeah. And that, yes, I can always be doing both. That's the thing, is I can always be doing both. What I love about breath is it's always available. It's ever present. It's free, right? I think it takes more to train yourself to learn how to go into these memories and melt them. For sure. That's like, graduate level work in some ways. Like, I'm not going to lie. But training yourself to breathe in a full and balanced way, like that is something that anyone can do. And even people, right, that are my mother, like she's not able-bodied right now at the end of her life, but she can do that, right? That's accessible to so many people.
Let's talk feelings for a second,
Sure.
because one of the things that I love to say, and I want to hear your perspective on it. And this goes back to the necessity to feel your feelings. Because I think, and again, I'll speak from the man's perspective, a lot of times we don't. Sure. Right? We try and put on this alpha male perspective where it's weak to show emotion and we got to be, whatever label you want to put on it. But to me, in order to be truly emotionally healthy, like the simplest way I can phrase it is you have to feel your feelings without becoming your feelings.
Yeah.
So I want to hear your perspective on that, and just let's explore that topic.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I have two responses. My first one is like the idea that we're not feeling them. I don't believe that. I believe you are feeling them, but you might just be feeling them in a way that is shut down. That's actually maybe the way I'm feeling it is my traps are really tense, right? Maybe feeling the emotion in a particular way feels inaccessible. Maybe feeling it in a feminine way is inaccessible, but like we're always going to feel it. It's just going to either get stored as tension or it's going to be more free flowing, right? Which is kind of what we associate with feeling, which is like maybe there's tears, maybe there's emotion, affect, right? It's called affect in the brain. It's moving you. And I think some people don't like to feel like they're being moved. They like to feel in control, right? And so sometimes that can be scary to feel like something is, and I see this all the time in private breath work, right? It's like, oh, I don't know about that amount of allowing. Like, I don't know about that amount of allowing, right? And I think women, especially women who've birthed, like we know about allowing, there's just, it's either you allow or it's a long drawn out painful process, right? And I think we're doing that in micro moments all the time in life. We just don't realize it. So that's one thing. And tell me, like, remind me that the heart of your question again for the.
Well, I mean, it was really just about feeling your feelings versus being your feelings.
Okay.
And I think, to your point there, you're spot on with like, you're going to feel your feeling one way or the other. And, whether you decide to just lean into it and let it happen, or you try and control it and let it spin up to be this big other thing. It's coming one way or the other, right?
Yeah. It's there. It's already there because emotions are born of memory. Emotions are born of meaning making, how we're seeing the world, right? So it's already here. And I have to just give props to my son for this one. We read an article about 2 years ago on a drive somewhere, and it was on meditation in the brain. And it basically stated that everything we're experiencing in lifetime is actually already past. Like the way that time and nature works is that actually everything we're experiencing is already gone. And so, and the Buddhists knew this, so they saw the whole world as impermanent. But he's always reminding me, like, it's already gone. It's already gone. So if we can come into, and I really believe this, like change comes from understanding. Like when we understand something and the mind and the heart can get on board with it, right? Like for instance, how valuable it is to let emotions just to allow emotions, how valuable it is to let them come and go. I think I read somewhere they're like 6 seconds. When you let it happen, it's usually 6 seconds of a feeling.
Right.
And what we've been gearing ourselves up for is not at all what's about to happen.
It makes me think in this conversation about allowing yourself to look at something from someone else's perspective, right? Because I've never been and will never be a never married mother, right?
Not this time around.
So I will never get the perspective on all things that you have, right? And likewise, you won't have mine. But I think we approach everything from the scenario of our perspective. Obviously, we spend literally our entire lives in our own perspective. That when you look at a scenario, it almost becomes impossible to see why that may rub somebody a different way.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right? And the example I love to use about this, I'm 6'4". I am not a small dude. When I go out for a walk at night, I don't think twice about, hey, will there be a creepy person lurking around the corner, or do I have to fear for my safety? Right. Don't even think twice.
Yeah.
My wife, quite the opposite, right? She would have that general concern, right? She's not going out for a walk at night.
Right. She's not going for a walk at night.
Yeah. Right. Like, but the first time, and this happened during COVID, I would go out at like midnight, go for a walk, and it was amazing because there was nobody. It was a ghost town, right? And you could walk down whatever main street you wanted, and there was not a soul in sight. It was peaceful to me. And I was like, you should go out for a walk. And she was like, what the heck are you talking about? I'm not going out there. And I never really thought about it because to me, my entire life, like that's how I approached it. And, I think when you look at, take that same scenario and apply it to anything on social media or how someone runs their own house, you look at it like, hey, if it were me, I would run my house, I would run my relationship, I would run my business this certain way, because that's your perspective. And I feel like one of the best things I ever did was implement the words to me after the majority of my opinions. Yeah. Right? Because it allows you to kind of frame it from your perspective.
That's it. Right. And Swamiji, I come from also a lineage of East Indian teachers. And that was one of the first things I was taught, right? At 22 years old was like, just lead with from my perspective. Because not only does it allow the person in front of you to drop their defenses and to hear your advice or input, but it actually changes your defensiveness, right? Because it just places you firmly in your own ground, which kind of takes us to the whole next layer of how am I moving through the world? So again, one of my teachers would say, what am I really up to? And do I have an agenda for this other person? For anything in my life. For moms, often I'm training them to look at where do I have an agenda for my kids and my life and my family? Like how much energy am I expending, my energy expenditure on how other people should be behaving? And how much am I just really learning to lead myself and have genuine conversations with those people who I used to have an agenda for?
Right. I think, we've danced around the subject a bit, but like, who even are you at that point? Right. Because, I feel like in so many examples, as you become a mother and you dedicate your entire life at that point to nurturing this child of yours, it's very easy to put yourself on the back burner. Right. So you're no longer considering, hey, how do you take care of yourself? Who the heck are you? You just become a mom. Yeah. Right. And you forget that you were like an actual person before that with like needs and wants and goals and just life. Yeah. And, when I look at so many different social interactions, I think a lot of the time why you see such arguments is because if you are not able to prove the other person wrong, that means that you are not right. Yeah. And being right and being in this little echo chamber is your identity, right? It's who you are. And if all of a sudden that shatters because you're not able to prove that other person wrong and reaffirm, hey, you are right in your belief, you cease to exist, right? So it's so important, I think, to have that understanding of who the heck you are, right? Without anyone else's criticism, without any other worldviews, like really concrete understand again, we go back to the authenticity part, right? How we literally started this conversation. If you know who you are, right, the rest of it doesn't matter. I could care less. I can go read the comments. I can go listen to whoever. It doesn't matter to me. I don't care if they're right or wrong because it doesn't affect me. I know who I am. I know what I believe in.
Right.
But I feel like there's not enough people who've done that work yet.
Yeah. I mean, that just takes it to a whole nother level in terms of the conversation of like two things. Why are we really here? Like, have I spent time in this body, in this breathing body, this time around, this lifetime, or if you don't believe that, in the lifetime that you have, you know, have I taken the time to ask, like, why am I here? How can I serve? What's the highest use of me in this body mind I've been given? You know? And one of the things I teach is that, especially in regulation, right? I'm in well-being, and regulation is a huge topic. And there's the regulation people and there's the counter-regulation people. You know, it's always this. But one of the main ways that we stay regulated as a human being, in my perception, is that we stay connected to our higher purpose. Because if you don't have a higher purpose and connection to who you are, you're not going to be willing to sustain the trash things that happen along the way. You know, like, you're going to get feedback, and you're going to get uneducated, nasty feedback along the way. You know, and I think with women, I just want to speak this one piece. Oftentimes we're told to do all this self-inner work, but then we're not told how to like go out into the world and practice this so that we build the muscle of not pleasing people. And this is really important, because it's one thing to be in yourself feeling like you know who you are, and it's another to be able to maintain that when you're in relationship, right, in the world.
Well, I mean, I guess especially the hard part there is when you're surrounded by people who have not yet done that also self-work.
Yeah, you know, it's such a funny phenomenon. It's like the clearer we get about who we want to interface with, what's going to grow us, I find the less I'm in circles with people who haven't done their work, the more I'm in conversation with people who've at least begun and can have a cosmic joke about themselves, you know. Yeah, I also just want to speak, like, it's been beautiful as a woman to grow into myself and then have relationships with men where I'm like, wow, this is what healthy relating looks like. This is what it looks like when I can show my rage and fury, and a man can say, wow, I can see from your perspective how you'd feel that way. I don't agree, but I don't need to get defensive with you. And then I'm like, wow, this is our future. Only uphill from here, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's kind of the beauty of it is as we continue to have these conversations and kind of strengthen our own perspectives and belief in and who we are, I think it gives us a little bit of, whether you want to call it armor or education or wisdom or whatever you want to call it, to go out and sit with someone who maybe totally never started this journey. And I think that's a necessary part of this, at least from my perspective, because if those people don't spend time around someone who is willing to sit and see and hear them, right, and not judge them and criticize them and argue right off the bat, they will spend their entire time with people who are just going to criticize them, and they will continue to drag each other down. And I feel like, to me, it is an important part of this responsibility as you continue to level up and to grow and to be who you are, is to spend time around other people. Maybe it's not the most comfortable, the most fun. I get it. It's kind of taxing, right? It's not your first choice necessarily. But I feel some level of obligation to sit and have these conversations. And I don't mean it to sound like I'm better than anybody, right? That's not the point of this. But just to be so secure in who you are that you don't need them to see you for you to see you. And it allows you the space to see them. Yeah. Did I explain that right?
I mean, what I feel that all the time in my work, there's oscillation between helping people grow and providing validation and support, right? Because oftentimes people have just never been seen. This was a huge, huge part of my journey, was like, for a couple years, post some DV experiences, domestic violence, things that just cracked my world open, things I thought I would never experience in my lifetime because I didn't come from a family like that. After experiencing that, I would have these moments where I'd feel like, wow, nobody wants to see this level. Nobody wants to talk at this level. Everybody wants to come up here. Everybody wants to be in this positivism, cult of positivity. Like, how do I get out if I'm untouchable, unseen in this experience? So I absolutely resonate with like one of the most like nourishing things I do for me, even in my work, is provide that level of seeing for another woman and say like, let's go there. Let's go all the way where you need to go, because when you're seen, you will naturally blossom to the next level. Like, and again, it's not levels, but it is like, if you're in the process, like there's certain places, it's like a video game. And then next time you go back, you start at that same level. You don't start at the beginning, right? So
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There is this weird, I'll speak for myself at least, this weird selfish high that you get when you interact with someone who feels loved, appreciated, seen, and heard for the first time. Like you can see them kind of unlocking.
Yeah.
To me, that's such a gift. And like to be able to have and experience that with them is so much fun.
And for me, I'm like, whatever it takes to keep me in the game. Like, this work is not easy. Like, waking up work is not easy in my experience. You have to go through a lot with people. It's not, I'm not selling a product that's just resells itself. I'm in a space where I always have to be providing really earnest value, like really top-notch presence. And so, yeah.
I mean, I think the other part of that too is like, this is not sexy work that people are necessarily attracted to, because in order for them to be a customer, they first have to admit they're not super happy where they are.
Yeah.
And like most people just don't want to admit that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's the hardest part about my work is, you speak to someone's true problem and they're like, ooh, I don't really want to look at that problem. But they're, at this point, again, it's like, I just connect back to, do I have an agenda for other people? If that's where I'm operating from, I'm going to do weird shit along the way. So I just retract, come back into my own purpose, how these things have helped me, how it works in my perspective, and the fact that I would never wish anybody else having to spend, a graduate education cost on what I've done. Like, I want you to have it for $77. Like, I want you to have it for $600 a month for a year. Like, I want this to be over for you and for you to get to the other side without the level of maybe investment and suffering I've had to do. Like, if we do that, right? It's a funnel in a way, like human development. If we're all figuring out ways to do that, it's a good end.
Yeah. Well, plus it's a multiplier, right? So the more people we're able to have these conversations with, the more people who are kind of eyes open to it, who can have that conversation with someone else. And I think that's really the only way that we move forward. Yeah. Is there anything that we haven't covered yet, or maybe a topic you'd like to talk about, or something along those lines before we kind of get to wrap up?
Love it. Let's see. I mean, I think early on, you had talked about the head of household and this kind of idea that, excuse me, we have to like dominate something. I'm always curious in a conversation when I start to get this, like I always know we're going into a space where the conversation is deepening. It only happens when we're at this cycle. So what I want to talk about is briefly domination paradigms, because I think if everyone had this education, we wouldn't be going, how did we get here? And so I want to just speak the name Riane Eisler. She's a cultural anthropologist. She's gender-based studies major. She's, I think, 93. Her last podcast she did last year at 92 or 93. And the woman is just sharp as a nail, right? Like, she has been doing this work for 50 plus years. And I do just want to say, like, her family came to Cuba as refugees from Nazi internment. So like her experience started with deep family, deep recognition of domination systems and how authoritarianism works. And what she studies is this continuum between partnership societies and domination societies. And recognizing like we're on a continuum here. And even right now on planet Earth, there are cultures that are operating out of partnership, but we just don't focus on that. We're focusing on these relationships that are born of domination, more domination-based cultures, right? And as part of a domination-based culture, child rearing is a huge part. And so how kids are brought up in these cultures is significantly different, right? In partnership cultures, it's generally like allo mothering. There's many people mothering one child, so it doesn't all fall on one person. They're usually cultures that have like some form of local goddess worship, and that it doesn't have to mean that that's God. It just means that there's deities, there's honoring of women, there's multi-age schooling. So kids are developmentally connected to other ages, right? Like very specific things. And then on this side, in domination-based systems, we have a lot of like separation of ages, nuclear family homes, head of household, meaning somebody's at the top of a hierarchy. And all of these domination-based systems tend to lead to feeling lost in terms of my purpose and my core security, whereas partnership systems tend to focus on the gift of the child-centered learning, creating worth, an intrinsic sense of worth in the human being, and trusting that when that person has intrinsic self-worth, they are going to serve. They're going to be a contributor versus domination systems, right, are raising consumers. Like they're raising people to work in systems, in hierarchies, in schools, in governments, in all of these ways. So I just bring it up because I think when we realize there's actually many ways to do culture, there's many ways to do family, and that there isn't this hierarchy everywhere. That's part of this enculturation, right? And there's systems all over that are working in this way. And it doesn't even have to mean they're tribal. It just means, right? Like Norway and Sweden are great examples. They have the toughest laws on rape. They have the toughest laws on domestic violence. They have some of the best economies right now, right? They have the free school for all their students. So those are, excuse me, those are partnership-based societies. So yeah, I think the piece that I'm trying to bring in here is like systems thinking. When we bring in systems thinking and we start to connect the dots and we're like, oh, it's not all about this, like you and me, what is our rights? What are our rights? And we think more about what's our duty? Like, what's our duty to the culture, to the family?
Yeah. And I think to bring it to the average household is kind of the understanding of you can be dominant at a thing without being a dominator overall.
Yeah, like power with versus power.
Right? But I think that requires balance. It requires selflessness. It requires listening. It requires a bit of humility. I don't think those attributes are as common as they should be. And I feel like there's a lot of ego-led relationships, right? Because to me, when I look at what makes a great relationship is very mixed, right? In terms of like, between me and my wife, we are both dominant at different things. And we have to recognize, hey, in this area, this is all you. Okay. So when it comes down to it, we're going to give 95% of the weight of the decision to you in this area because it's just, you're gifted at it. Yeah. But it's not, a dictatorship. Right. And I feel like there are too many that are leaned into that where it has to be this way or the highway. Yeah. Because if it's not, then somehow you're worth less. And I feel like it's someone needs to hear that part of the conversation to understand, like, when you figure out that we're all really connected at the end of the day, there's a lot of really cool things that happen when you start honoring the people around you.
Yeah, just really disconnecting the idea of success and dominating. like dominating over or dominion over. Like, it's okay to like have the market in a certain environment. It's okay to have goals, visions, right? And what's the word I want to use? It's like, it's a little more like it's okay to be assertive. It's okay to be direct. None of those things mean that you're a power monger. Like, it's like, right. It's where you're coming from. And I think after all this research, right, in the PhD, I just remember getting to this place where it's like, wow, so much of the behavior change that I wanted to see in the world, the behavior change I was trying to cultivate in myself, it really comes down to these emotional memories. So like, I got to that place where it's like, what can I do to help people build patience, build a reserve, as a gap between stimulus and response? How can I really do that? Oh, okay. The best way to do that is by handling these emotional memories, and they change behavior. Like, when we change those, they change the eyes we're seeing through, So yeah, that was important for me too, is figuring out how this looks, how somebody does that at home. How does this become accessible?
Yeah. I think it comes down to, obviously, I'm not going to boil it down to one word, but the word it reminds me of the most is intentionality, right? How you intentionally apply that which is given to you. And when you look at, as we continue to grow on this journey and become bigger, better, stronger versions of ourselves, what do you do with that power, right? Do you use it intentionally? Because you could use it intentionally for good or for bad. And to me, like, as we continue to go down this AI road of ours, where more things are becoming AI based, I always love to just kind of remind people that there's a different definition you can use. That's authenticity and intentionality. Right? If you can master those versions of AI, you can really do some awesome stuff. So I just want to honor you for this conversation. It has been a lot of fun, and we are literally at our timeline now. So like, we could probably talk for a lot longer, but I want to honor you and your time.
Thank you.
Again, thank you tremendously for that.
Yes, thank you for your great questions, and I hope it supports everybody listening.
Yes. Any way we can support you going forward best?
I mean, I think it's just, for me, it's like when other people win, I know the work is worth it, right? So letting people know, maybe there'll be some show notes where people can look into my program on massive trust, audio courses I've built, things that are just like great first entry points. Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, again, thank you.